A man arrested for allegedly shooting and killing a woman in the Northwest Valley. Police say Marvin Simmons opened fire after an argument, killing the victim while she was trying to drive away. It happened near Schomburg and Farm Roads. That's just west of Centennial Hills. Police say the two had a romantic relationship. Simmons has been booked on murder charges.
She thought it was just another quiet drive. A few miles to drop off a gift, and maybe pick up the last pieces of her dignity. Instead, what she got was a moment so final, so cruel, it would shatter everything she had built and cost her her life. This is the story of a woman who wanted the truth, and a man who would do anything to bury it. You're watching True Crime Watch HD. If stories like this matter to you, if you believe in justice and want to understand the dark corners of human nature, then hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. We uncover what others look away from. Now, let's begin. Her name was Keturah Denise Fazel. But to those who knew her, she was more than a name in a headline. She was ambition wrapped in grace. A 28-year-old rising star from Henderson, Nevada, Keturah was building a fashion brand from the ground up. Her designs were bold, elegant, just like her. She wasn't just modeling clothes. She was modeling resilience. Friends described her as the kind of woman who lit up rooms. A giver. A fighter. A woman with a plan. And for the first time in a long time, it seemed like everything was finally going right. Then she met Marvin. Marvin Simmons, 31, was charming in all the ways that seem harmless, until they're not. Handsome, confident, attentive. He said the right things. Took the right trips. Promised the kind of partnership that every driven woman hopes for. But there was one thing Marvin didn't offer: transparency. Because behind the smile was a secret. Marvin wasn't single. In fact, he was in a long-term relationship with another woman, with whom he shared 2 children. And they all lived together, in the very home he told Keturah she couldn't visit. He said it was complicated. He said he needed more time. He said a lot of things. For 8 months, Keturah played the role she thought was hers to play, believing she was the only one. The girlfriend. The future. She brushed off the odd behavior, the phone turned face down, the sudden silences, the mystery weekends. She filled in the gaps with hope. But hope is an armor. And eventually even hope runs out. The cracks started small. Missed calls. Canceled plans. Vague excuses. Then came the trip. A weekend in Miami with Marvin. A chance to reconnect. Rekindle. Reset. She bought him a new pair of shoes while they were away, just a small token of affection. But when they returned, Keturah's world shifted. She learned the truth. All of it. The other woman. The kids. The lies. And just like that, everything made sense. Every red flag, every unanswered question, every time she wasn't allowed through that front door. What Keturah did next wasn't reckless. It was human. She wanted answers. On the evening of March 7, 2022, Keturah drove from Henderson to Northwest Las Vegas, a 37-mile journey. She brought her sisters with her. Maybe for backup. Maybe for peace of mind. But what she didn't bring was fear. They pulled up outside Marvin's home on Jamestown Square Avenue. Inside that house was his girlfriend, his children, his double life. Outside was the woman he had deceived. Keturah sent a message. Let him know she was there. Maybe to talk. Maybe to return the shoes. Maybe to see if the person she loved even existed anymore. Marvin responded with a chilling text. Leave. My girl is here. But Keturah had already arrived. And she wasn't ready to go. She stepped out of the car and walked toward the garage. Now, here's where the story fractures, because what happens next is seen through 2 very different lenses. One from Marvin and one from the women who watched it unfold. According to Keturah's sisters, the garage door opened. Marvin stepped out. He looked shocked, angry, afraid, not of Keturah but of what her presence meant. Of the truth finally being exposed. They argued. Voices raised. Words spilled that no one can recall, but will never forget. Then came the shove. Marvin pushed her. Hard. Keturah stumbled. But she didn't fight back. She turned around and walked away. It should have ended there. It almost did. The garage door began to close. Keturah approached the car where her sisters sat waiting. Maybe the confrontation was over. Maybe she'd cry in the passenger seat and wonder why love had betrayed her. Maybe she'd move on, start again, rebuild. But Marvin wasn't done. Because in an instant, the garage door rose again. And Marvin stepped out, this time holding a gun. What happens next is hard to say without a chill running down your spine. He aimed. And fired. What? Twice. 7 times in total. Bullets tore through the car, shattering glass, ripping through the night. One of them struck Keturah in the chest. She collapsed into the seat beside her sisters, who watched helplessly as the woman they loved slipped away. Paramedics rushed her to University Medical Center. But it was too late. Keturah Denise Fazel was pronounced dead. A bright light extinguished in seconds. And Marvin? He ran. Fled into a nearby home, hoping to hide from what he'd done. But not for long. Police formed a perimeter. He surrendered without a struggle. His hands empty. His secrets laid bare. But even in custody, Marvin couldn't stop spinning a story. He told police Keturah had been aggressive. That he feared for his family's safety. That he saw people in her car and didn't know what they were capable of. But then, he admitted something else. That Keturah was unarmed. That she was small. That she posed no real threat to him. And still, he fired 7 times. A woman lay dying in the passenger seat of her car, her blood soaking into the upholstery of a moment that should have never existed. Her sisters frozen in horror. The man who pulled the trigger, gone. And the silence that followed? It wasn't peace. It was shock. The kind that only settles when reality becomes undeniable. By the time the flashing lights pierced the suburban calm of Jamestown Square Avenue, Keturah Denise Fazel was no longer responding. But the case was just beginning. Police were called at 9:58 p.m., March 7, 2022. Reports of gunfire in a quiet Las Vegas neighborhood. When officers arrived, they found Keturah slumped inside her vehicle, barely clinging to life. Her sisters, visibly shaken, could hardly speak. The pain was fresh, undigested. Paramedics rushed Keturah to University Medical Center trauma. But the bullet wound to her chest had done irreversible damage. Doctors worked to stabilize her. But at 10:41 p.m., the monitor flatlined. Keturah Denise Fazel was officially pronounced dead. One shot. One decision. One man. And an entire future, erased. Back at the scene, officers didn't need to look far for their suspect. Witnesses pointed toward a nearby residence. The same one where Keturah had just come from. The one Marvin Simmons fled into after pulling the trigger. Inside that house, his long-term girlfriend and 2 children. A family he was trying to protect from the consequences of his own deception. Officers formed a perimeter. Guns drawn. No movement. Until a door creaked open. And Marvin Simmons stepped out. Unarmed. Calm. As if nothing had happened. He didn't resist. Didn't argue. Didn't beg. But when the interrogation began, Marvin's version of the story immediately began to twist. According to the arrest report, Marvin claimed that Keturah had become aggressive. That she tried to force her way inside. That he felt threatened, not by her, but by the others in her car. He said he feared for his girlfriend and his children. A textbook claim of self-defense. But the facts told a different story. Marvin said he fired because he saw people in the vehicle and thought they might hurt him. But when asked directly whether Keturah had any weapon, he admitted she did not. He was 6 feet 2 inches. She was 5 feet 3 inches. Unarmed. Walking away. And yet he fired 7 rounds. That's not panic. That's punishment. And investigators knew it. Keturah's sisters told a more coherent, consistent story. She had gone there to drop off a gift. A pair of shoes she'd picked out for him just days before during their Miami trip. Her intent? Not violence. Not vengeance. Closure. They saw Marvin open the garage door. They heard the argument escalate. They watched him push her. And they watched their sister walk away, refusing to escalate, choosing distance instead. Then, the door reopened. And he fired. Again and again. The police compiled the evidence quickly. The text message Marvin sent just before the incident. Leave. My girl is here. A line that wasn't filled with fear, but with exposure. He wasn't afraid of harm. He was afraid of discovery. That everything he built on lies was collapsing in real time. But instead of facing the fallout, he reached for a gun. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department labeled it a domestic violence homicide. A tragic outcome rooted in emotional manipulation, deception, and possessive rage. Keturah and Marvin shared a child. Their relationship wasn't casual. And in the weeks before her death, Keturah had believed, despite the mounting signs, that they were still building something meaningful. But Marvin knew better. And so when she showed up, with truth in her eyes and the past in her hands, he chose a permanent solution to a problem he created. By March 8th, Marvin Simmons was booked into the Clark County Detention Center on 2 charges. Open murder. Discharging a firearm into an occupied vehicle. He would appear in Las Vegas Justice Court the next day. But this wasn't just a legal proceeding. For Keturah's family, it was a reckoning. In Henderson, word spread quickly. The vibrant young woman who had inspired so many with her designs, her poise, her tenacity, was gone. Just like that. Her brand, Keturah Echelon, had been gaining traction. She had been modeling her own clothes, building a life that many could only dream of. She was admired, respected, and, above all, loved. But even ambition doesn't bulletproof you from betrayal. At her vigil, friends and relatives gathered under the sky she once dreamed beneath. They released white doves, symbolic of peace. Hope. Her spirit finally free. But among the prayers was a haunting question. How did it get this far? Let's pause here. Because what happened between Marvin and Keturah wasn't just a crime, it was a pattern. One that repeats in homes across the country far too often. It begins with secrecy, then control, then escalation. And if left unchecked, it ends in silence. Experts in domestic abuse say one of the most dangerous moments in any abusive dynamic is the moment the victim leaves. When the illusion cracks. When the lies can't hold anymore. That's when the abuser loses control. And that's often when they lash out. In Keturah's case, the illusion she disrupted wasn't just Marvin's double life. It was the fragile ego that held it together. The confrontation wasn't physical. It was psychological. She held up a mirror. And Marvin couldn't look. So he pulled the trigger instead. But even as the court prepared for the trial, Marvin's defense tried to maintain the self-defense narrative, pointing to Keturah's arrival, her presence, the aggressiveness he felt. But in the eyes of the law, it wasn't enough. Keturah was walking away. And Marvin made a choice. The truth was no longer buried. The blood had dried. The bullets had been traced. The confession was recorded. But justice still had to be earned. Because while Keturah Denise Fazel lay 6 feet beneath the ground, the man who took her life sat in a courtroom, protected by walls she would never see again. When Marvin Simmons walked into the Las Vegas Justice Court, he wasn't in handcuffs or covered in blood. He wore the face of a man who still believed his version of the story could be rewritten. That maybe, just maybe, if he could shape the narrative, he could shape the outcome. But the evidence was louder than any defense he could give. The prosecutors came prepared. They didn't need to exaggerate. They didn't need to speculate. The facts on their own were devastating. A woman, unarmed, walking away. 7 gunshots fired in rapid succession. A garage door that opened not once but twice. And a confession, one that undermined his entire claim of fear. In Marvin's own words, Keturah was small, unarmed, and not a threat. Those weren't the statements of a man defending himself. They were the words of a man explaining the inexplicable. The court reviewed the digital trail left behind. The text Marvin sent just before the confrontation had one line that echoed through the courtroom like a warning no one had heard in time. Leave. My girl is here. It wasn't a cry for help. It wasn't fear. It was exposure. The panic wasn't about danger. It was about being caught. He knew Keturah's presence risked everything. His secrets. His image. His control. And rather than face the fallout, he reached for a gun. In court, Keturah's family sat silently, enduring each painful detail. They heard how Marvin tried to run. How he lied to investigators. How he described her as aggressive, only to admit she never had a weapon, never threatened him, never even made it past the garage. They heard about how he watched her walk away, and then chose to turn that walk into a death march. The defense attempted to shift the blame, suggesting that Keturah arrived uninvited. That emotions were high. That Marvin feared retaliation. But the jury didn't need to be told what fear looks like. Fear doesn't shoot someone 7 times. Fear doesn't aim at a moving target walking away. Fear doesn't go back inside, grab a gun, and return with intent. This wasn't fear. It was fury. Marvin Simmons stood accused of 2 charges. Open murder. Discharging a firearm into an occupied vehicle. And with each piece of testimony, with each timeline clarification, with each forensic expert confirming trajectory, intent, and fatal injury, his guilt became impossible to deny. Meanwhile, the community reaction had grown from shock to outrage. On social media, Keturah's name became a rallying cry, not just for justice in her case, but for women across the country who find themselves entangled in manipulative relationships that turn dangerous behind closed doors. #Justice for Keturah trended locally. Posts poured in from women sharing eerily similar stories. Some had left in time. Some hadn't. Keturah's story wasn't just her own anymore. It was a warning. Experts in trauma and domestic abuse weighed in publicly. One former prosecutor stated, "This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment altercation. This was a controlled, premeditated decision to silence a woman who had learned too much. Another called it classic escalation, a pattern seen far too often when lies are exposed and abusers are forced to choose between truth or control. And then came the forensic testimony. Ballistics experts confirmed the gun was fired from a distance. The trajectory of the bullet that struck Keturah? It entered from the front passenger side, meaning she was likely in the car, seated, when she was hit. This was not a spontaneous shooting. This was an execution. In a case that moved swiftly due to its clarity, the jury returned a unanimous decision. Guilty. Marvin Simmons was convicted on all counts. And while no sentence could reverse what had happened, it was a step toward accountability. A step toward closure. But closure is complicated. After the verdict, Keturah's family released a statement. We carry the weight of this every day. But we will not let her name fade. Keturah was loved. She mattered. And her light was never meant to go out like this. They established a memorial foundation in her name to support women in abusive or deceptive relationships, offering resources and guidance, something Keturah didn't have access to in time. Her story was now a lifeline for others. Let's be honest, we want to believe we'd see it coming. That we'd notice the lies, the red flags, the cracks in someone's story. But Marvin Simmons didn't start with violence. He started with charm, with warmth, with support. He waited until trust was earned, then weaponized it. That's what makes stories like Keturah's so difficult. Because it wasn't just the bullets that killed her. It was the manipulation, the erosion, the psychological conditioning that made her believe she was safe, until she wasn't. There's a line in every relationship, between love and control, between support and surveillance, between compromise and sacrifice. Keturah never crossed that line. Marvin did. And when he did, he didn't just take a life. He took a daughter from her mother, a sister from her family, a future from the world. Before we close, we want to leave you with this. If you feel like something's wrong, it probably is. If someone avoids showing you their life, their friends, their truth, pay attention. And if you know someone who's isolating, changing, or making excuses for behavior that doesn't sit right, don't wait for the worst-case scenario. Speak. It might be uncomfortable, but it might also save a life. Thank you for watching True Crime Watch HD. If Keturah's story impacted you, leave a comment below. Tell us what stood out. Tell us how we can protect others before tragedy strikes. And if you haven't already, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and help us continue telling stories that matter. Because behind every headline is a human story that deserves to be heard. This was the story of Keturah Denise Fazel. She was more than a victim. She was a woman who dared to confront the truth and paid the ultimate price.